Hey, it's Chris, Liege of Games. Let's do this. So this is Silver Coin, Age of Monster Hunters. This is a big box, folks. What do you need to know about this game, my impressions on it, to help you figure out whether or not it's right for you from a gaming perspective? I'm going to give you an overview. I'm going to give you impressions. I'm going to give you a breakdown of the things or the dynamics that are going to be make it or break it for you, my pros, my cons, and a little bit of everything else in between. Hopefully, this will be helpful for deciding whether or not it's right for you. Let's do this. First off, let me say right away, because the comparisons are going to be made, and it was on my mind when I was thinking about it, playing it, reading through the rulebook along those whole lines, and the similarities even just in the name have to be mentioned. Monster Hunter, The Witcher. That is going to be the main comparison in which you are going to make a decision based on this game. Because say what you will about it, it's not the same game by any means, but the comparisons, just like with Primal and Monster Hunter, similar concept, different execution. And the same is true about this game when I talk about it compared to The Witcher, because I had a hands-on copy of The Witcher, so I can directly compare that for you during this video if that's of interest. And so let's talk about what this actually brings to the table here. One thing that I have to mention right from the get-go, this is a huge freaking board. This is the playmat for it, folks. Take a look at this for a second. Right? Absolutely, utterly, freakishly large playmat. And it's almost by necessity, because what you'll see in a second when I give you a top-down view, that there are a lot of points on this map that really need distribution, that you really get a lot of detail on, that would be potentially too small or too close together if it was that much smaller in actual size and scope. And that plays into several of the dynamics, because you're traversing these kingdoms, going on missions that you obtain via drafting or acquiring from the market in order to defeat said monsters, in order to earn victory points, to level up your characters, to gain knowledge in the various knowledge bases that you need depending on the kingdom, and so forth until, you know, the game ends. It's played over 24 rounds. That's total in terms of how many different times you're playing, and that's broken down into rounds, into seasons that are all going to have various effects on what is happening, not only on the terrain or in the areas themselves, but also with how the monsters may be interacting with you in terms of boons or curses. So here, if we go to the top-down view for just a second, you can see an example, an illustration, a partial demonstration of all of the different decks that you're going to be seeing. Now, the thing I'll say, this is a player aid, two-sided already. This is a symbology and an overview in terms of the phases of the play. There's a lot going on. Each of these are individual symbols that you're going to be dealing with. And that's not even to mention at this point a whole other set of decks that you're going to be utilizing and drafting here in terms of the different areas and the different symbols that go along with this. And we'll talk about this in a second, because this is the big thing that really sets it apart from The Witcher, are these individual cards that you're going to be getting. And what you'll see is that there are several different symbols in the upper left-hand corner. And the interesting aspect of this is they all come in various colors. You know, you have your greens, you have your blues, then you have your blacks, and then you have your whatever that is, the horse symbol. There's the symbols, but then there's also the colors that's supposed to match up in that sense. And so you have about 6 different ones. But what happens is you can only either play the same color or the ones that have the same matching symbol. And so that's really where the dynamic is, because these are each going to give you different abilities. They're each going to give you different actions that you have as a whole, but they're going to be vastly different in how you want to accomplish them, how you want to play them, and in the organization which you're going to be able to get them is really what matters and drives this forward, as you can see. And you can see that they have up to 4 here on this one. You have your movement, you have increasing your reputation, increasing experience, or changing the flow, which is one of your characteristics that you're going to be utilizing from one session to the next in terms of the physical versus the magical, depending on what character you are and how you want to emphasize things. But all of these different decks are doing different things. You have items right here. You have monster hunters that are already sort of NPCs that will change the dynamics of the board. Then you've got the seasons cards, which are going to have one of 3 different areas on them in the first place, depending on what season it is. will have a different effect or a different way of doing that round, bidding versus auctioning versus just straight up drafting. And so it changes the dynamics of what you're going to be seeing, and the weather conditions, as you can see, will change as you go along as well between seasons. So those are all different things that you're going to be having to mitigate. And just for example here, we'll move this aside a second without causing too much chaos. But with all of these cards, right, you have to have somewhere to put all of the cards as well. And here you have this freakishly large, massive stack of boards that are going to be supplementing the game as well. You've got your seasons here, you've got your sort of time management, then you have the months, which have different daytime and night times, which are going to have different effects on the monsters as well as your abilities. You have the monster cards that you have themselves, and then you have these player character boards here, which are the other main aspect of things. And you can see along the left side of those, it really gives you the main glimpse of what you're going to be doing and the objectives that you get personally trying to achieve. And depending on what you do, it's sort of a fill the row, fill the column, and get your bonus, if you will. And they increase the hand size of the number of cards that I just showed you with all of the different actions that you can hold on any one turn, as well as giving you bonuses if you fill the column down there at the bottom, getting you the sword action, which gets you like a +1 to all of the monsters that you're fighting. And so if you fill up, then you get bonuses. And you're going to have to be going from kingdom to kingdom to kingdom to kingdom to kingdom here in order to do so, in order to gain the knowledge as one of your various actions to fill these spots up. So it has that element that can be directly compared to Monster Hunter in that sense of going around and gathering knowledge to upgrade your skills, but it's done in a completely different manner. And you can see all of the boards here are symmetric, and it plays up to 5 people. Here are said boards for all of those colored cards that you're going to be obtaining from the marketplace, which are going to give you not only the location of the monster, you're going to have one card that does that, and then you're going to have another card that is the monster itself that you're hunting. And there are 3 levels of monsters that you're going to be utilizing in this game. Now, the other interesting aspect here, and this is probably one of the more intriguing aspects that I've ever seen, and what this is this is your basic setup at the beginning of the game, depending on how many numbers of players that you have. And there's always a little bit of contention in these games of, is there somebody more overpowered? Is there somebody that's slightly less powered? You're seeing tier rankings coming out of things like Gloomhaven, and tier rankings of games like Marvel United, and I'm sure other games will have future things like that, like Marvel Champions, for example. They rank, okay, who's the strongest character or not, right? So naturally, in order to mitigate that, I mean, even with Terra Mystica, this is probably the closest example that I've seen from Terra Mystica, is people draft, and they draft based on, bidding. And so this does similarly from an Amerithrash. So what you do is you set out the number of characters that you need according to your player count. And then, based on that, you can put one of your markers down here at the bottom saying, okay, I'm going for this one, but I'm going to bid. I'm going to start with 100 gold. Well, if somebody wants that more than you, then they're going to say, okay, I am going to take this, but I'll take this guy with 70 gold instead. And so that's the difference that you start to see, and you start to see it across there. And there's a lot of text, and there's a lot of iconography even on these characters. The main gist of it being, well, you don't get knocked out. You have health on this side, you have your statistics on this side, and then you have your special abilities down here at the bottom, which are going to be taking place in different phases, different events, and different actions as you would expect. And they are very asymmetric. They have very strong differences in terms of not just being one of those games where it sort of kinda does that, but no, it's definitively there. So let's take a look at this one, for example. This one right here. This is your melee fighter. And so the melee fighter in this game essentially is a person that, fights a lot, right? And that's the aspect of things that you need to be aware of as sort of the second big point here. This is dice combat. This is you calculating monster strength, you calculating your strength, rolling your dice to see if you can roll higher than the monster. If you do, monster loses a hit point. If you do that enough times, you capture the monster. And these monster cards are relatively intuitive, but there are 3 different levels like I mentioned. The red here being the tier 3s. And the other aspect of this that you need to be aware of is that they're going to have values here for their health, and this is the value you're trying to overcome. So in this case, in case you can't read it, it's 5 health, and 13 attack. But as you get lower on these silver monsters, which are the level 1s, 3 health and, you know, what is that, like 6 attack? So much easier to do, but there are a ton. This is, you know, easily dwarfing well more than what was in The Witcher, and so the lack of variety is not going to be an issue in this game whatsoever from that aspect of things. And there's a mid-level here, the brown, this is level 2, you know, 3 health, you know, 10 damage, and then they all get pluses or minuses based on the season, based on what else is going on, based on where they're at, where you're fighting them, and what other conditions may be affecting it from that aspect. So those are things that you just need to be aware of. So let's go back to this player board a second. This is your basic player board. Like I said, you're putting your character here. So they're going right here, right in the middle, if I can actually grab this one. And then you have your experience, you have your flow, your physical flow, and your magical flow. And then you have your actions down here that you're going to be taking, potentially with a bonus action. The basic gist of these actions is relatively straightforward, right? You have this, which is your combo action. You're going to play those movement cards and perform location actions. Then you just have the movement, so you can perform up to 5 spaces along these boards. And as I said, you know, these are small spaces, and you can't really see them fully here, but you know, these are small, they're close together. 5 spaces seems like a lot in other games, but in here it's relatively a small amount comparatively, and so you just need to be aware of that. Then you have your location action in general. So your location action, if you go to one of these bigger cities or these ports, for example, which are off screen here, or in some of these other locations, you have like 5 different places that you can do or act on in those locations that are going to give you like knowledge, and they're going to give you flow, or they're going to give you experience, depending on what you're looking for. Then you have a replace card. So if you don't like let's see, one of said these cards, for example, one of these cards, you can start to replace them or use your flow in order to replace them, but you have to have enough in order to do so in the first place. I mean, this game has gone very nuanced into a lot of detail. As I mentioned earlier with the seasons. The seasons, for example, will affect the movement that you do. So if it's winter, it may be harder to move across the land. Sea travel might not be affected. You know, there's an ocean over on this side of the map that you can't see, and so there's an ocean on the other side of the farm map that you can't see either. But that's the sort of thing that's going to happen alongside of all of these other conditions that are going to affect the basic actions and how they work. There are things like hidden paths going across these areas, depending on if you are a certain character or you have one of the path cards that allows you to traverse that and basically take a shortcut, if you will. But those are the dynamics that are going to be within each of these individual actions. Even though the overview action is relatively simple, there are branches that it's going to spread out in. Like I mentioned, for example, with the monsters, with your fighting the monsters, going to the location where the monster is, having the monster card, having the location card, you also have the knowledge base that you need to have here. So you need to have 3 knowledge for this monster. Now, if you don't have 3 knowledge enough for this monster, what happens then is that's an extra boon. You can still fight the monster, but it's going to give this monster's strength of, what was this, 8 now? It's going to be actually higher for each one that you're under. And so it doesn't limit you from doing what you may want to do with some of these monsters, but it's going to handicap you even more, even though this 9 is essentially with 2 dice plus whatever other dice you can get, and we'll talk about that in a second, gives you a pretty good chance of getting it, but you definitely need to be able to mitigate some of these other pluses and minuses potentially on your side and the monster's side to be aware of. So with that general overview, let's talk about some of the things you may like, some of the things you may not like, and sort of where my opinions and thoughts were on both of those as well. First point I have to say is, if you're looking for something like The Witcher, but The Witcher wasn't done in depth enough in terms of the branching actions that you're given, because I mean, The Witcher is relatively straightforward in terms of its action and decision making and sort of tree that follows in terms of what you're doing, you know, one after another. This is going to give you, just by the sheer plethora of actions. I mean, I didn't talk about all of the different location actions that you can do, right? I have the rule book right here. So when you visit that capital city, that yellow city on the map, right? You visit the tavern, you visit the docks, you visit the merchants, you visit the townsfolk. There are 4 different things that are vastly asymmetric that you're doing within just one simple action. And that is basically the bigger nutshell of this game. How detailed, how nuanced do you want? When I think of this game compared to others like The Witcher, this is going to give you much more control. At the same time, it's going to lead to a longer game. It's going to lead to people having to be aware of much more. And that's both a blessing and a curse when it comes to this. Do you have time to invest in a 2 to 4 hour game? On the longer end, definitely with the first couple of plays, but it gives you more mitigation, more ability to manage these things across the board, more bidding, more control, less chaos to go with your Amerithrash if you prefer that, because this eliminates it in a significant way in those areas. Another pro, I like the bidding. I like the automatic inclusion of the bidding for characters, but that also means that you have to have sort of a meta evolved. Otherwise, that bidding that I showed you at the beginning of the game, right? With this little board and the bidding along the bottom, otherwise that doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. Like if I don't know the difference between one character or the next, or I don't have a particular strategy because this is my first time playing, it's not gonna matter as much, which I guess is kind of good, but also could be a little bit handicapping too if other people are just getting the character that they're most familiar with without being challenged and getting all the resources that they want to go along with it too. So that's just something you need to be aware of from that aspect. No boards or games were hurt in the making of this video. The thing that is going to swing people one way or the other is how much symbology do you actually care about? You know, with these cards, you know, artwork not final on some of this, it's not a big deal whatsoever. But how much symbology that you need to know of all this stuff? Most of it is relatively simplistic and relatively straightforward, but it's still more than other comparable games like The Witcher out there that are, you know, a learning curve in and of themselves, oftentimes in these situations. The other aspect of things that I really like is the sheer variety, like I mentioned, of the monsters. This is a massive amount. I've never seen this much in terms of a base game of things. Just tons and tons. And again, goes to the mitigation of these with the variability and the money system, which I guess that's also a mixed bag. I mean, these money systems, you're going to have to use math. You're going to have to use math. You're going to have to tally them down. I mean, this one's 290, 290, 160, 160, 80, 80. 80, 120, 190, 550. So are you okay with that odd numbering system? Because that is a big determiner in who wins at the end of the game, who has the most money. Because this is Monster Hunter. This is Age of Monster Hunting. So that is what you're primarily doing. Now, I've only played the competitive version. I don't have the solo or cooperative, which are going to be out during the campaign as well. So if you want to take a look more from that aspect, it is similar in the sense that The Witcher also has a similar dynamic of the trilogy of different modes. Things I think people may not like with this game. I mentioned the cards. I mentioned the battling. I mentioned that system in terms of you're just getting dice, and if you can get a couple extra colored dice through various abilities and effects, they'll give you extra dice to roll along with the 2 that you get normally. But ultimately, as much mitigation +1, -1 with the monster effects on the bottoms of the cards that you see, or the weather effects that are there, it doesn't change it drastically. Like if it's a 13, you may get like down by 2 or 3. I mean, at most, or for most cases. And so then you're still talking like a 10 potentially, right? And rolling a 10, if you only have 2 dice, odds are not very good on that, you know? What is that, like 3 out of 36? So that's the sort of thing that if it's going to not appeal to you, the combat system for The Witcher in terms of pulling the cards and mitigating the cards and drawing them and playing them out of your hand and having a limited deck and supply is going to matter more, because again, with that monster who then I've gotten down to 10, if I only have 2 dice, well, if it's 1 die roll, right, and you can get lucky on 1 die roll, great, you win, right? Well, that's fine, except for the fact that now it has 5 life, and you need to do that 4 more times in order to win before all your little health on the side of the card gets knocked down. And you don't get knocked out, but it affects your strength as you go down, which is a good thematic incorporation, but it also hurts you a lot. Now, I didn't mention the fact that you can actually heal in this game, and that's one of the other various actions that you can take in some of the locations. But it's so much going on. If you're looking for something more streamlined, if you do not have a dedicated group to play this game multiple times over multiple short periods of game sessions, this game is probably going to be a pass for you, because it requires a lot more overhead than, say, The Witcher. I mean, you can teach The Witcher much quicker than I could teach you how to play this game. And that is both a blessing and a curse. If you want something more in depth, if you want something that was more akin to, I did Earth Under Siege Flashpoint earlier in the year. Like, that was a super deep dungeon crawl, Metal Gear Solid, so much nuance, so much going on. And if you want that, great. But if you don't want that, it's going to not work with you at all. It's not something that you can just skim over, fly by the seat of your pants, look up rules as you're going, and have a good time. No, that would frustrate the heck out of you. And so would this, with the minutia of some of these aspects, of those nuances, those branching points of those actions that I mentioned in terms of the 5 that you have as options. Are you okay with that? If you're not, again, it's probably something that you're not going to like. I hesitate even comparing it to several games out there under the crawl variety, because this is not a dungeon crawl game. This is an open map exploration management style game, optimization puzzle-ish game. And that is how it directly compares to The Witcher, and why that comparison is the most apt. Now, it's not deck building like The Witcher is, more so in terms of the combinations and the colors and the actions in that way, but it's more Euro style, as I mentioned, with the different actions along the bottom of the player board and having to choose and mitigate depending on the circumstances that you're given. If the events that are going off each round change things, the weather changes things, or what cards are available to you on these freakishly large marketplace boards in the first place. And so, I mean, I say that as a good thing because you have a plethora of everything. But as with a lot of Kickstarter, crowdfunding, GameFound, backer kit games now, is more better. And that's the one thing I worry about with this, is so many nuanced actions, so many modes going on. Can it be well enough balanced? Is one of these modes going to overshadow the others? And as the person who has the competitive mode right now, that is the one that they are presenting. I mean, it was sort of like with ARCs, when ARC said, okay, here's our single session one, right? And people were, people, both non-reviewers, non-previewers, as well as online players during the campaign, were kind of like, okay, but I see this issue and this issue and this issue. And they finally said, okay, wait. Let's here's the campaign version, and you can see how it differs and how the dynamics are going to be. And so that would be the one thing I would wonder here, is how does this dynamic differ from a cooperative sense? Because I would imagine that it would be different in a good way in that aspect. And it may just be, do you want to pay this much money to have 2 modes that you may only use one of, if you have a preferred mode? If you have a preferred competitive mode, if you have a preferred mode being cooperative, are you better off getting a game that really just focuses on one over the other? And would you be essentially paying for both when you aren't going to use both? That was my problem with Bloodstones from Druid City Games, that canceled last year and is going to be launching later this fall, was I didn't really want the PvP. Like, I wanted the PvE, right? I didn't want to pay extra for both. So, food for thought. All in all, where are things at? This is really something different. No lie. This is something different. I'm not sure where it's going to fall, because, again, the attention to detail and the depth of this, as opposed to most of the crowdfunding games that are of this ilk, tend to be lighter, tend to be more streamlined, tend to be more of your, I can learn and play and joke and go along as I go and be okay. This is not going to be for you. This is more akin to, Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor over here, just out of sight, than it is to, say, Zombicide, in terms of the nuance, the rules, the overhead, the meta, the knowledge base that is going to be required to be successful, where there is going to be a significant learning curve. And if you are, this game is not going to hold your hand in terms of someone else being here and someone else being here, even with those bidding mechanisms at the beginning. Because as you saw, I mean, the monster values that I was reading off, the lowest ones are 80 and the highest ones are over 500. So, whether you start off with 30 or 60 more gold than someone else at the beginning, that's not really that much of a difference. So there you go. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you have any comments, questions, or concerns down below. Hopefully this is a nice format for you guys and you like this. Let me know what you think of it in general. Higher definition as well too, so it's going well so far. Let me know if you have any other concerns, and as always, just thank you for watching. Thank you for these guys being willing to send me the game in the first place, to be able to show you a little bit more of what the prototype looks like and my impressions based on it. And, well, just thank you guys for watching in the first place. hit the thumb, subscribe if you want. More where this comes from. Got a busy rest of July, the end of the month, so beware. Lots more videos coming out in this sense. Stay classy. Thanks for watching. See you around.